We're going to look now at what life was like for people living in colonial America. The colonies grew and grew and grew. The populations became much larger, and they became more prosperous. They began to make money. They also became more English. The original protest against England, like the Puritans in Plymouth, for example, that begins to fade, and people in the colonies begin to emulate the English more and more. The colonies are also, they're going to develop differently than England because the geography is different, for one thing. And also they're more diverse. There are people from all over Europe in the colonies, as well as growing numbers of African Americans as slavery takes over. The colonies also vary widely from the north to the south to the mid-Atlantic part, but also even within those regions. For example, Georgia and South Carolina were very different, even though they border each other. The population is growing rapidly, but in the beginning that's because of immigrants coming over. And by the late 1600s, there are more non-Native Americans in the colonies than there are Native Americans, which is pretty significant. Few people come from the upper class. The vast majority who come over as indentured servants. An indentured servant is somebody who agrees to work for a landowner, usually, for originally 4 to 5 years, although this stretches out to about 8 to 10 years. And in exchange, the landowner gives them a place to live and provides their clothes and their food and stuff. And at the end of the term, they also, by the way, pay for their passage to America. And at the end of the term, the indentured is supposed to get tools, clothes, and maybe even some land to settle on. But most of them did not get these things. Most of the time, the owners reneged on the deal and didn't follow through. And so what this creates is this huge population of free, propertyless indentured servants, people who had been indentured servants but now have no way to support themselves. And they increasingly protest the government. They turn to crime. They start farming land that isn't theirs. And most importantly, in 1675, they're going to unite, a group of them are going to unite in Western Virginia under Nathaniel Bacon, the aristocrat. I did a video on him before. And they are going to rebel and seize control of the colony of Virginia and almost declare an independent country, except Bacon gets dysentery and dies. This, combined with the declining birth rate in England in the 1670s, an improving British economy, and a growing fear of coming to the New World because of all the disease, will lead to a decrease in indentures, both in people willing to come here, but excuse me, but also in the colonists' desire to have indentures because they see them as future rebels, and this will turn the colonies towards slavery. Here we see the expansion of the colonial population. It really begins to take off, if you notice there, right around the turn of the 1700s, the first few decades of the 1700s. Let's talk about birth and death. Starvation, disease, and an early death were totally normal in the early years. Most people did not live long lives and die a natural death. By 1700, 3/4 of the non-Native American population is male. There's almost no women in the New World for a very long time. That's a problem because there's very little natural increase, meaning a man and a woman having babies and population growth that way. Although by the 1650s, we do begin to see significant natural increase. From 1650 to 1700 in New England, the population increases 400% just counting natural increase. And so by the late 1600s, we begin to see more and more women in the colonies and kids being born here. In New England, people lived very long lives, in fact, longer than they did in England. The average lifespan for a male was 70 and for a woman was 71. Although this did drop down to 65 in later generations after the 1700s. But it was still higher in England, even at the lower rate, and it was more than 20 years better than the South. Now, why did the people in the North live so much longer? Well, they had cool climates, they had fewer diseases, they had access to clean water, and the population wasn't as dense, so you didn't have as much disease and stuff spreading among people. The South was far worse. 1 in 4 Southern babies died in infancy. 1/2 of Southerners died before they reached the age of 20. The average lifespan for whites, just whites, who lived the longest, was less than 40 years old. Only a third of marriages lasted more than 10 years. And you ended up with lots of people who had no parents, lots of widows and widowers, because death was just everywhere. And so almost everyone had family members, multiple family members who had died. Why did this happen? Well, there was a lot of disease in the swamps of the Chesapeake in that area. There was also salt, which contaminated a lot of the water. Although over time, the Southerners began developing immunity to these diseases and actually begin to live longer and longer lives. The population in the South grows, but it's really only due to immigration. There's very little natural increase in the South. In the early years, the South is 75% men at a time when it was 60% men in the North. And the South will not have a balanced sex ratio until 1700, or about 100 years after the British arrive. Colonial medicine was not helping with the death rate. Colonial medicine was not good. They had no understanding whatsoever of infections, bacteria, sterilization, or dirty water. The primary source of care were midwives, which you see up there in the two pictures on the right, actually. Midwives basically used folk remedies or traditions handed down to try to treat people. There were a few trained doctors, but people didn't trust them because they didn't know them, and most common people knew a midwife personally and trusted her and were not interested in going to a doctor. The doctors, of course, weren't going to do a whole lot of good because they believed in the old Greek, we're talking ancient Greek, 2,000-year-old theory of medicine, of the four humors, that there were four different liquids in your body, and if you were sick, they were out of balance. And so they would prescribe things like laxatives, or forced vomiting, and of course, most famously, bleeding, with the idea that this would bring the four liquids in your body back to balance. It's all nonsense, but that's what they believed. There was no concept of professional medicine that somebody would be a trained, licensed doctor. That idea doesn't exist and won't exist for a long time. And there was no real embracing of the scientific method in medicine, that we should test things or make observations to figure out what was going on. The STEM Kid Academy should be aware of that.